Thanks for downloading this episode of Cork Talk with me, Tim Atkin. A weekly conversation with some of the most famous people in the world of wine.
This podcast is brought to you in partnership with Nomenclature by Vinventions. Driven by a commitment to innovation, the new plant-based Nomenclature Green Line offers significant improvements in wine closure performance. Thanks to a rigorous oxygen ingress rate, you can decide which cork is best for your wine, whether it's for young and fresh wines or for those with ageing potential.
Passionate Andalusian and Professor of Law at Granada University, Jesús Barquín is also one of the key figures in the modern sherry revolution. Equipo Navazos, the company he co-founded with his friend the winemaker Eduardo Ojeda, has pioneered single cask as well as unfortified wines from the region. Our fascinating chat covered the nomenclature of sherry, famous vineyard sites, Edgar Allan Poe, and why Amontillado is his favourite wine.
Hello, Jesus. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And you?
I'm really well, and lovely to have you on the podcast. You're a lucky man. You're in Andalusia, aren't you?
Well, it's where I belong, sort of I belong. I don't have any other choice.
You're in Granada, right? But you were born in Sevilla,
right.
Weren't you?
Right. I was born in Sevilla from a family mostly coming from the north of Spain who migrated to the south so as to go away from hunger. So, well, here we are.
And tell us a little bit about your upbringing. And what did your parents do? Were they academics? Because you're an academic as well, obviously.
No, not at all. Not at all. As I said, my grandfather on my mother's side, he came from Soria, sort of half mid part of Spain in Castilla, and my father came from Cantabria, from the north of Spain. In both cases, from very small towns where it was difficult to go ahead. So they were migrating and looking for a better life. And they
so many people did, right? Yeah.
And my mother and my father, actually my mother started it, put a grocers in Sevilla, and they were grocers shopkeepers, and it's where many of my family work currently in that area, in the food business, also in the restaurant business, and with cattle in the town. Yeah.
And was wine part of your life? Did they sell wine in the shop?
Yeah, true. They actually my mother, who is in her 80s, she hasn't retired. She's still working.
She's still there selling.
Yeah, that's what she enjoys. And they were specialized in fine food, in jamón, in Iberico jamón, fed with acorn from the Sierra of Huelva. Yes, probably the best. And charcuterie in general, and wine. In those times, there were no big supermarkets, so you could focus on good quality products, and that was more or less my context. But I prefer to study.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people in the wine world associate you with Equipo Navazos, obviously, which we'll talk about in a minute. But you're also very, very distinguished academic and university professor. You're a catedrático, which is a very high level of academic at the University of Granada. What's your discipline? Tell us what you research and what you
Well, I'm
write
a
about.
professor, or in American terms, a full professor of criminal law. I'm an academic lawyer. And, I since in Spain, criminology has started to be serious a couple of decades ago. I've also done a little bit of criminology in my research, but basically I'm an academic lawyer on criminal law.
And any crossover with wine? Presumably not.
Not in general, but there is one. Probably my most cited paper is one about driving under the influence, and it's an experiment that I made because the official publications, what the authorities say about how much wine or how much beer you can drink before getting drunk or before being subjected to an addiction in driving under influence didn't match my experience. So I did an experiment which is published in a few different stages of it in a few academic publications. And
you didn't drive a car drunk, did you? Did you drive the car drunk?
No, not at all. It was about measuring what level of ethanol impregnation was in a cohort of people, mostly students who collaborated with it, after social drinking, so to speak. After it was 3 doses of wine. We did it with wine for a number of reasons, and it was quite interesting. It was quite interesting to double check that it actually what the authorities trumpet is not accurate. They probably know, I'm sure. They over alarm the population. But at the same time, I must say that I'm not sure whether that's wrong or not. It's probably, I have my guess that they do well in over alarming population.
Well, I think that's a good,
one level is the policy about it, and another level is to know exactly how it works, which is, I must say, as a resume, that it's never exact. It depends a lot on each individual.
Let's talk about wine, because not just drinking and driving, but actual sherry. Because you were a wine lover long before you went to the actual business of wine, almost by mistake. I mean, did you just get interested reading about it, drinking it, visiting wineries? And it was mostly focused on Andalusia, wasn't it, where you live?
When I was young, the main leisure activity in my family was going to restaurants or a few restaurants of friends of mine, and there was the context was one of eating well and drinking well, but drinking well mostly Rioja and sherries, which are the traditional top wines in Spain. So quite early, I think that it was 18 when I started to take notes of my tastings and so on. And I discovered that in the comparisons I made of wines from different parts of the world, actually, when I started to get curious about that, since the very beginning, I found out that sherries in general were underrated, and they were affordable, and they were also easy to taste and retaste, many of them, because of the alcohol content and because of the structure and the age. If I was happy to try a bottle of, let's say, Vega Sicilia, it was a one-time shot. While if I bought a bottle of venerable sherry, I could taste it along 1 year, 2 years, or even more, which was
and
quite
it doesn't oxidize any further.
Exactly.
I love your idea of underrated and affordable. We all want that. Tell us about Equipo Navazos. How did you meet Eduardo Ojeda, who's your partner in the business? I think it was somewhere quite unglamorous, wasn't it? You met him?
Well, yes and no. I had by then, when we met up, I had already been writing about wine for El Mundo Vino, for El Mundo, the Spanish newspapers, who had a very strong wine section, El Mundo Vino, led by our common friend Victor de la Serna, is a clue person in the evolution of wine appreciation in Spain, in my opinion, and. I, together with my friend, another academic, Álvaro Girón, we had developed a sort of a way of thinking that was against many of the settled ideas about sherry, out of our own experience. And since Eduardo had just, a couple of years before, had got the position of director of the Grupo Esteves and had got in a position where he was starting to make wines coming from a single vineyard, different wines, also wines coming from vineyards in Sanlúcar. We were both, Álvaro and I, very interested in talking with him and checking his experience with our ideas and our experience are as tasters. So in a wine fair in Ciudad Real, Cenabín was, well, not very glamorous, but quite a serious place with a lot of wine. Yeah. And Eduardo was doing a serious tasting of his wines. I asked a couple of questions. At the end, I came to talk with him, and then he invited me to go to the bodega. I went there, and well, since we got along, and Álvaro also, and we started to catch up each time I went to Jerez, because I've always been visiting the area every year a couple of times, because I like Sanlúcar. We went there for short holidays in Christmas and so. Yeah.
And then you started doing this thing where you started finding single casks of sherry, really, botas, in bodegas and bottling them. The first one was what? It was La Bota de Amontillado Uno, right?
Right.
And you named it after Edgar Allan Poe's short story, The Cask of Amontillado. Where did you find that cask?
Well, a couple of nuances here. The context is that Eduardo then started to, we were visiting bodegas anyway, because we were writing, Álvaro and I, a series of articles on Amontillados and on Manzanillas and so on. And Eduardo one day invited us to visit a small bodega in Sanlúcar, Sánchez Ayala. We tasted 400 casks of Manzanilla, but it's a special way of tasting. You don't taste with the palate every cask. You smell it, and if you find something which is shocking, is when you taste it. And when we finished, we did
shockingly good. You mean
shockingly good or shockingly
bad?
Weird.
Yeah.
So because he was checking the quality of wine of his company that was aging there, and then we went to the own company Soleras. We found there was an Amontillado of very good quality, very, very nice, and that had been unbottled for almost 20 years, because there was not a market for it. Actually, the market for this dry aged sherries is quite small. It's still quite small. And I had the idea that we might bottle it for us. Why? Because I had been for a couple of years or more, I had been bringing bottles of different wines, taking out from the casks to the typical wine dinners or wine meetings, like the ones we met up. It was in Stockholm. I remember
Neil Beckett's house. Yeah,
at Andreas Larsson's celebration of his success at the sommelier contest. And you bring bottles and you share them, and we found that they were quite successful. That people like them and say, "Oh, this is a sherry that I really like." Many people who are not, or who used not to be too fond of sherry. So why don't we bottle it and we put a proper label so that we can bring it to this type of meetings as a wine of ourselves?
That was the first one.
And that was the first one.
How many bottles did you make of the first one?
It was, in the end, it was 1,000 bottles on average.
Okay.
Sorry. 700, I think it was. 1,100, it was the second one, I guess, I think.
And then it became very successful, didn't it? And you started to do others.
It was successful since the very beginning. The very first day I told my friends, wine lovers, wine writers, sommeliers, winemakers, that we were going to, we had in mind bottling it but that we needed a minimum quantity so as to make it doable. The response was massively positive. So that it was a success in the very beginning. And some of them, or even many of them, said, why not a Manzanilla? Why not a Fino? Why not a Pedro Jimenez? That's the reason why we put, since the very beginning, the number one. Because we knew we were going to make more since the very first days, because there was
it became a business,
an
didn't
interest.
It
became it became a business a couple of years afterwards, when that structure was no longer sustainable. We needed to do payments and things like that. So at the beginning, it was sort of very informal.
I mean, you're focused very often on single casks, but you're also focused on single vineyards, aren't you? You know, Macharnudo, Miraflores, places like this. Just tell us a bit about those vineyards. Were those vineyards famous historically? Are sherry lovers paying more attention to the cru now than they were, say, 10 years ago, thanks to you?
Yes, but this is a comeback. This is a comeback because we have documents and we have written about them in the 18th century with the classification of the crus in Jerez and Sanlúcar and all the area. And yes, probably places like Miraflores and Macharnudo, and particularly Macharnudo Alto, have maintained its or their prestige along decades. This was diffuminated in the 60s, 70s, when the winemaking changed, when instead of fermenting the wine in small batches, most often at the same houses of the vine, as they were called, they started to ferment in big inox tanks at the premises located in centralized positions. That changed everything.
Yeah, sherry became industrialized in a sense.
Exactly.
At one level.
And a few things were lost. One of them was the appreciation of the crus and the vineyards and the provenance of the wines. And in the last 10 years, I think there has been a little bit of a comeback to that, yes.
Sherry famously has these three towns, doesn't it? Jerez de la Frontera, El Puerto de Santa Maria, Sanlúcar de Barrameda. Are they very, very different as places, particularly not just in terms of the styles they make, but also the way the wines age in those towns?
Enough different for justifying a name of a different provenance in general. Yes, but there is, in my opinion, there's even more difference in the vineyards. So all that is something that should be reviewed. Actually, it has been reviewed recently because you've mentioned the three traditional towns of the triangle, while these wines, these traditional wines of made in the area, have been also made for centuries in other places like Lebrija, like Trebujena, Chiclana, Chipiona, even Rota, Puerto Real, in times till quite recently, even in Cádiz. But they have opened that. Now all those places, not Cádiz, because there is no more bodegas in Cádiz, but now you can bottle sherries that have been aged in Chipiona or have been aged in Chiclana, in any of those places. And I think a further step is to require or to regulate that when a wine comes from Sanlúcar, it's not only about aging it in Sanlúcar. It should not be only about aging it in Sanlúcar, as is the current state of things. But it needs to come from vines located in Sanlúcar. That is the big difference. Yeah. If you allow me, Tim, I must clarify something. It's true that we started by finding a wine and finding an owner of a wine who was kind enough to allow us to bottle it. And it's true that occasionally we still bottle exceptional wines that have been aging for decades, sometimes even for more than 100 years, under the care of different producers, and that's a privilege. But I must say that Equipo Navazos, already since 2006, our second wine, La Bota de Fino, was not a wine that we found out and bottled. It was a wine
making wine. Yeah, you're making
had
your
been
own wine.
made by Eduardo, because we are, Eduardo Ojeda and me. Eduardo Ojeda is a winemaker. Yeah. He has been the director, the main winemaker at José Esteves for more than 20 years, and before at Croft for another 20 years. And he has been making wine. Part of the 20-something or 30 million bottles he made every year went to the mass market or to the brands of his house. But a small part of it came for Equipo Navazos, made with a special idea to be produced in that way, you know. So it's a bit complicated, but it's not accurate to consider us just as sort of treasure hunters. It's part of it. It's true.
You make wine as well.
That we make wine.
You're talking about complicated. I like your line. You say that, you quoting the Greek, saying that beautiful things are difficult, which I like very much.
Exactly.
Sherry can be complicated to somebody coming from outside and looking at all these different names, Manzanilla Passada, Fino, Amontillado. What are all these different things? Can you just give us a quick overview of the styles, main styles, particularly talking about biological and oxidative aging? Talk about the two ways that sherry can move.
Yeah, that is it. Well, just in words and briefly, it's quite complicated to accomplish. This is a complicated task, but basically we have finos and manzanillas, which are aged under floor and whose typical alcohol content is 15 in most cases, but it can be 16 or 16.5 because the alcohol can increase, but it's due to concentration. Then on the opposite, I'm going to talk only about dry styles, which is 95 or even more % of the production, and which is are the features of the region.
So you're excluding PX and cream styles, yeah?
I will exclude PX so as not to complicate, because PX it's made out of raisins, and mostly in Jerez, the PX comes from Montilla Moriles. The base wine is bought in Montilla Moriles, which is something regulated in the current laws about law making in the area. So if we concentrate on dry wines, the lighter styles are Fino and Manzanilla, and the oxidative styles is mainly Oloroso. Oloroso is a wine that is basically only aged under oxidation. In order to prevent the floor to develop, you fortify it above 17%, because otherwise you risk that the floor will develop. And there's two intermediate styles. One of them is Amontillado, which is a wine that has been Fino or Manzanilla in first place, and once it's an aged, it's an already grown Fino or Manzanilla, you shift it to oxidative aging, and it becomes an Amontillado after aging oxidative for a number of years. That explains why it's, in my opinion, intermediate categories like Fino Amontillado should have never been forbidden, as is the case, because the real world doesn't work as our minds. We work with categories, but the real world is a word of nuances, of grease, never black and white. If you have a Fino and you want to make an Amontillado of that Fino, that necessarily will go through an intermediate state between Fino and Amontillado. At the beginning, it will be more Fino than Amontillado, then will be more Amontillado than Fino, but there will be an intermediate state, which will be that. And then there is the Palo Cortado, which is a little bit more complicated even, There is no mystery in it, by the way.
Because I noticed that you were involved with the project, weren't you, with the film, a documentary that was called The Mystery of Palo Cortado. There is no mystery, right? You're saying
there is no mystery. It's that's a matter. Well, this documentary was my idea. Actually, the original script was written by a friend of mine, Andrés Alés, who is a writer for documentaries and so on, and myself. But then the producer and the director, they made whatever they wanted.
They gave it the name.
Right. They gave it the name, and they did things that I don't agree, but it's their privilege.
Tell us about Palo Cortado, because it's another intermediate style in a way.
It's intermediate because Palo Cortado, while you can characterize Amontillado in terms of process, you have a fino or a manzanilla, and once it's a grown fino or manzanilla, you oxidize it and you get an Amontillado. Palo Cortado is not defined by means of process. Actually, if I have to explain someone how to make a good Palo Cortado or an excellent Palo Cortado, I can do it, but it won't be the process, the difference. It would be the same process as for the Oloroso. The difference is that for making a Palo Cortado, you would use the finest must, the finest wine use you would have, instead of a rich one that is the one that you typically use for an Oloroso. So a Palo Cortado is a fine Oloroso or an elegant Oloroso.
And does Palo Cortado ever see floor or not?
It may, because traditionally, but things have changed a lot. Traditionally, before industrialization and before fermenting in big inox tanks of even thousands of liters, or tens of thousands of liters, when wine was fermented in casks, in 600 liters cask, maybe you had a big bodega where you had every year 3,000 casks of wine fermenting and then developing flor for becoming fino, typically fino in Jerez.
Yeah. So it's possible.
And then you went and tested it, and some of them took a different way.
Okay.
And maybe you needed to add some alcohol, a jar of alcohol, and you cross with a line. That's the Palo Cortado. It's a line that you cross with another one because you have added a jar of alcohol. But now everything is much more predictable. You don't have to be checking so many casks, so you need to know how to make it. And one of the ways to make it is by selecting very fine wine and aging it as a fine
Oloroso. You've described Amontillado as the king of Andalusian wines. I presume the king means that you think it's the best. Why is that? Why do you think Amontillado is so special in a way?
A good Amontillado that has been before a very good fino or manzanilla. And then if you go on respecting the process, doing things well and aging it properly, Amontillado gets a sort of a level of complexity and at the same time of verticality in the palate so that you can drink it very smoothly. That probably is where you can reach the top or the maximum of intensity, complexity, layers of aromas and flavors and so on. But they would put that more or less at the same level good old fino Amontillado or manzanilla pasada, where you have at the same time drinkability and complexity.
I mean, you're a very good taster. You've even represented Spain in international competition. But, when we taste sherry or Montilla, which is another expertise of yours, you say it requires a special effort from us. What sort of effort do we need to be making when we're tasting these wines? Is it imagination in a way?
No. I think this mention probably is out of context. It was probably, when I said so, it was when people from Spain who are used to drink these wines talk about international tasters. You need to get into them. They are not easy. They are wines. They are an acquired taste, as we all know well. I think that advanced wine tasters are used to them, but most people who like wine in general, or people who approach wine, a fruitful wine, even a red fruitful wine with where there are not so many amaros or bitterness and flavors which are not usual for any They have to make a special effort and to get sort of over a fence so as to get the best of these wines. That's what I mean. Mainly in terms of acquiring a taste.
Okay. I mean, I always think it's interesting when you're tasting a solera, and solera is a system of fractional blending, that there could be components in the solera which date back, 200 years, which is amazing. When Napoleon was in Spain, I always find that to me is part of the joy of tasting sherry, that this leap of historical imagination in a sense. Do you think that's true?
Well, it's true in infinitesimal terms. That's true. And probably if you want to, I don't have such a romantic approach to wine, truly. I'm more about what is in the glass. If what is in the glass seduces me, it's okay, and I don't care that much. Probably in that case, I care more about its provenance. But if I don't like it, I don't care about
the history. Doesn't matter
the history.
So much.
So, in my personal approach, but I understand that it's part of the story, and it's part of, and it's true in infinitesimal terms. It's true, but if you have a wine of 60 or 80 years, which, as I said, we have been lucky to bottle a few of them, it is true that there will be a wine with even much more than 100 years inside, and that can be very. To me, what that provokes is veneration and respect.
I like that idea.
You must do things well when you are dealing with stuff like that. You have to be very respectful.
I like that idea. Let's talk a little bit about still wines, because one of the things you've done as Equipo Navazos is being real pioneers of these dry wines, dry still wines, unfortified wines, basically. And I think the first one you did was with Dirk Newport in 2008. Did those unfortified wines exist historically in Jerez? When did sherry become fortified, as it were?
They needed to exist, because otherwise you wouldn't have the fortified wines. Before fortifying, you have a wine. But commercially, no. In the 80s, they started to put in the market relatively simple wines, looking for fruit and for not a complicated profile. For mass market, actually, for many years, the best sold the wine in Spain was a wine from the area, El Castillo de San Diego, known as Barbadillo, for many years. It was a wine made of Palomino Fino, and trying not to cause too much impression in the palate, but so that it would be neutral. Yeah. But the origin of our Navazos Newport is the origin of Finos and Manzanillas. At the very beginning, we have documents of the discussion. At the beginning, it was in Sanlúcar. It was in Sanlúcar when they were providing wine mostly to the taverns in the Bahía de Cádiz, in Cádiz and Puerto de Santa María and so on. And when they started the owners of the tavern discovered that the wine improved by the Solera system when some wine was added for refreshment. And in parallel, in Sanlúcar, they also discovered that by adding alcohol to the manzanilla, they made the wines more resistant because there is something we have talked about biological aging. When you have a wine aged in a biological way, like Fino or Manzanilla, you can do very few things, because with the wine you can add almost nothing, because there is a living creature inside, the Saccharomyces cerevisiae,
which is the floor, the yeast floor.
The floor, living inside and doing its work. That means that you have to trust that nothing bad is going to happen, but something bad can happen. Mostly that the environment is very suitable for other microorganisms, like mostly the acidic bacteria and the Brettanomyces.
Yeah,
and they found out of an empirical way that if you added alcohol, the wines tend to be more resistant
and more stable. Yeah,
more stable, because and that has been studied afterwards, mostly in the 20th century, because 15% is very good still for the yeast, for the floor yeast, but is not so good for these competitors, for these other competitors.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
If you age those wines unfortified at the average age, which is 11.5, 12, 12.5, which is the average alcohol level of wine use in the area, then you are facing a high risk of having a vinegar instead of a wine. So at the very beginning, we have this discussion. I mean, early 19th century, 1802, 1803, a discussion between the winemakers in the area. Some of them were in favor of adding some spirit for this reason, and others said that changed the style of the wine, so they were against the character. And so at the very beginning, before they discovered the Manzanilla was
unfortified.
At the very beginning.
Tell me something. I want to ask you about this, because there's a lot of talk about the sherry revolution, and you've been a big part of that, really, with what you've done, both with fortified wines and your unfortified wines. Is that being reflected in sales around the world? Is sherry becoming more popular again, or is it still regarded as something that, your grandparents used to drink, which is the reputation it has among many people in England, I think?
Yeah. I'm not sure. I'm not very much in the sales part of it, but my impression is that the traditional wines of Andalusia. I mean, I don't like to talk about sherries. I know that when we say sherry, everyone understands more or less what we are talking about, but it's very inaccurate. I prefer to talk about Jerez, about Sanlúcar, or about Manzanilla, or about Montilla, and so on. Because sherry, when you talk about sherry, people think more in the process than in the provenance. I like to stress the provenance. And I think I have made this comment, this remark, because I think that this sherry revolution must go, and has helped to go on in that way, in way of putting in first place those wines that reflects place. Probably the big sales numbers have not changed much, because most of the wine that was being sold around the world in the UK, in the Netherlands, in Germany, and other countries were cheap blends of sweetened wines, which is not the true character, like cream or medium, out of creams or medium, that can occasionally be extremely good, but in most cases are, just average, are decent wines, cheap, decent wines, but that doesn't add much prestige to the area.
But you could still buy a Fino like, La Gitana or Tío Pepe, which is, they're good wines, aren't they? La Gitana obviously being Manzanilla rather than Fino, but I think those are good wines and offer good things.
I agree.
Yeah.
And
go on.
Yeah, I think that, the sales of Fino and Manzanilla, which have always been the stars in the market in Spain are overcoming the sales of other styles. So in a way, I think there is sort of a revolution. It's true. The revolution is true. And it reflects more than in the overall numbers of sales, in the structure of sales. And I think that's a good step. That's a good base for future.
That's very interesting. Listen, our time is nearly up. So I'm dying to ask you a last question, which is, you're a very busy man, right? You know, you're a professor of criminal law, criminology. You've got Equipo Navazos, which is a very successful business. How do you relax? How do you get away from it? Is relaxation for you still going to wineries? Is it reading? Is it eating? Is it helping your mother out? I don't know. What do you do to relax?
Well, I practice a lot of sports in the last few years. I have sort of retaking my teenager passion of doing sports, and but that's a question that it's interesting because at some time I reflected about what I was really doing, and I found out. And it's true, I can confirm it looking at it retrospectively now, that what has worked for me very well is that when I was doing wine, like writing an article or thinking about the next wine we were going to bottle with my colleague and partner, Eduardo Ojeda, and so on, I was sort of taking a rest from my job. I was doing it. It's really a hobby activity. It's something that I have been doing in my spare time. But then that allowed me, when I came back to my lectures or to reading a decision by a court or an article written by a colleague of mine, I was enjoying, because I like that very much. I enjoy my profession. I was sort of relaxing from wine. So
the two help each other.
That's what I think. I'm sure it has worked with me. So I had never the feeling of being seriously working. I mean, in the sense of having to do something that you'd rather not do. It's something that I'd rather do because I was enjoying it. It helped me enjoy it.
I think that's a fantastic note to end on. You never really feel as if you're seriously working because you enjoy what you're doing. Both bits of your life you enjoy so much. Jesus, thank you so much. We could talk for hours about Jerez with you, and San Luca and Manzanilla and all these different things. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us, and see you very soon.
My pleasure, Tim. Always a pleasure to be with you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
What a fascinating deep dive into one of my favourite wine regions. And do buy a copy of Jesus' book on the wines of Andalusia. Next week on Cork Talk, my guest is Anthony Hamilton Russell from Hamilton Russell Vineyards in South Africa. Join me then.
Thanks for listening to Cork Talk. If you want to read more reports, articles and tasting notes by me, go to my website, timatkin.com. You can also follow me on Twitter @TimAtkin and on Instagram @TimAtkinMW. See you next week.